Climate change is increasing the intensity, frequency, and duration of heat waves, posing unprecedented threats to people, societies, and economies worldwide. 2023 marked the hottest year on record, with projections for 2024 pointing towards even greater challenges for public health, food security, water resources, and economic productivity. Amidst these rising temperatures, women bear a disproportionate burden, facing heightened health risks, economic vulnerabilities, and the weight of unpaid domestic responsibilities. Imagine the daily realities of women across Asia and the Pacific, working under worsening conditions and assuming the primary role of family caregivers in increasingly hostile climates. With every degree rise in temperature, pregnant women face higher risks of miscarriage or stillbirth. Each degree increase also heightens the chances of gender-based violence. Street vendors, agricultural and construction workers, those in high informality sectors are particularly vulnerable, laboring outdoors without access to cooling or protective shade. Factory and garment workers, often without adequate cooling in their workplaces, confront mounting health and productivity challenges. Examining the impacts of heat stress on women is critical to responding to extreme heat and building resilience to climate change. The Asian Development Bank is pioneering change, providing technical assistance to strengthen women's resilience to heat in Bangladesh, Cambodia, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Tajikistan to respond to this urgent need. ADB aims to deepen understanding, support gender-responsive heat action planning, and identify solutions that are women-led and respond to local contexts. As Asia and the Pacific's climate bank, ADB is building a more equitable, heat-resilient future with direct impacts on the lives of women and girls in the Asia and the Pacific. Good morning. Thank you for being with us this morning, despite the little bit of rain. I would like to welcome you to Rising Above the Heat, Forging Gender-Responsive Strategies to Extreme Heat. My name is Zonabel Woods, and I'm a Senior Social Development Specialist with ADB, and I will be moderating the panel. Over the next 1.5 hours, we will discuss how heat waves are having an impact on all aspects of women's lives. And while extreme heat impacts everyone, you will hear from our speakers how it impacts women differently. We will hear from our experts who are leading on identifying solutions to build people's resilience to extreme heat. To start the session, I would like to invite Samantha Hung, Director of the Gender Equality Division in the Climate Change and Sustainable Development Department, to open this seminar. Samantha?
Thank you, Zoni, and good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to see you all here this morning as we embark on this critical discussion about a very pressing issue of our time, and that is extreme heat in the era of climate change. So our seminar this morning, as you can see the title, Rising Above the Heat, Forging Gender-Responsive Strategies to Extreme Heat, is a significant step for us towards addressing the intersection of climate change and gender equality. So last week, for example, and we saw some of the statistics up there, many of you would have seen in the news that temperatures rose in much of South and Southeast Asia to record highs. We saw 33 million children out of school in Bangladesh, where temperatures in part of the country rose past 42 degrees Celsius. Half of the provinces in the Philippines, where ADB is headquartered, are facing drought. And Thailand reported the highest number of deaths due to heat stroke as Bangkok's heat index crossed 52 degrees Celsius. I mean, these are just a few examples of the statistics we're hearing. So escalating heat due to climate change is a profound crisis that needs our immediate attention and action. Now, the rise in global temperatures are more than just statistics and meteorological data. We're living in an era where unprecedented heat waves that are threatening food security, water sources, and life for all species. And as Zoni said, while they affect everybody, we do know that increasing heat is disproportionately impacting women and the poor while contributing to growing inequality. We'll hear today about how heat waves are contributing to economic, social, and public health crises that disproportionately affect women, but I just want to cite a few ways in which this can happen. So, for example, as primary caregivers, women face increased care burden during extreme heat events. Like with the COVID-19 pandemic, when schools close, women typically face a choice between staying at home to care for their children or being able to go to work. As the majority of informal workers, women are often also at great risk of dehydration and heat stroke from outdoor exposure, and they may find their livelihoods jeopardized by failing crops and the physical impossibility of being able to work in extreme conditions outside. Food insecurity and higher food prices often burden women more, as they are predominantly responsible for the food security of their families. And studies also show that with rising heat, we also see rising violence against women and girls. So today our speakers, we're really lucky to have such an esteemed panel with us, will be able to talk to us more about some of these gender-specific impacts. And as you would have seen in the video, recognizing these challenges, ADB is stepping up and forward with the technical assistance to address this particular issue. We're implementing this 3-year project in 5 of our developing member countries, and the aim is to build their capacity for gender-responsive heat action planning and to pilot interventions that specifically address this issue. Last week, I'm pleased to also say that our management also launched an internal task force which will bring together people across the bank to address increasing impact of extreme heat on women and communities. We also have some really essential partners that are working with us. For example, the government of Korea is helping us to finance and design gender-responsive early warning systems. So thank you for being here today to join this conversation. We hope that this seminar will be more than just a forum for discussion. We hope that you will join our call to action to ensure that our responses to extreme heat are comprehensive and inclusive, because it's such a complex and formidable challenge, and it demands nothing else less of us. Thank you, everyone. Back to you, Zoni.
Thank you, Sam. It is now really my honor to introduce Jeff Goodall to set the scene for our discussion today. Jeff is an American author and journalist renowned for his really insightful writing on environmental issues, particularly climate change. His latest book is the New York Times bestseller, The Heat Will Kill You First: Life and Death on a Scorched Planet. And if you've been reading the news over the last week, we are living in South Asia and Southeast Asia on a scorched planet. His book was an instant New York Times bestseller and was selected as one of the best books in 2023 by NPR, the Los Angeles Times, and The Economist as one of the best books of 2023. He's also the author of 6 previous books, including The Water Will Come, Rising Seas, Sinking Cities, and the remaking of the Civilized World, which was also a New York Times Critics' Top Book in 2017. And he has covered climate change for more than 2 decades for the Rolling Stone, the New York Times Magazine, and many other publications. So, Jeff, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you for that kind introduction. Thank you, Sam. Thank you to everyone at ADB for having me here to talk about this really important subject, and for highlighting it and spotlighting it at this meeting. I'm going to just talk for a few minutes because we have such a great panel that I feel like I want to make sure we have lots of room for them, so I'm going to be very brief. I just want to talk a little bit about my book and about this sort of big picture, kind of set the stage for this conversation that we're going to have about the risks of heat. And I think I should start by talking about why I gave my book such a crazy title as The Heat Will Kill You First, which my publisher immediately said, no, you are not titling your book The Heat Will Kill You First. No one will buy that book. And I really fought for it. And the reason I fought for it, I think, goes to the center of this kind of conversation that we're having about gender impacts, but also more broadly about climate change, which is that I think a lot of talk about climate change, a lot of policy stuff is about, it makes climate change and heat more specifically seem like a problem for distant places and distant generations and our children or our grandchildren or people who live in places where we don't live. And I really wanted to make this issue visceral. I wanted it to challenge the reader and you to think about this as it impacts you. And I explained this to my publisher, and they were like, yeah, right, okay, still no one's going to buy the book. You can be a judge about whether or not it's a good title, but that's why I gave it such a provocative title. I think that this discussion that we're having about climate is just too remote. And one critic called my book like a horror novel, which I took as a compliment. Because I really think, and this is a sort of big framing idea for me in this discussion, is that we're going to talk a lot about solutions today and things we can do and various policy and technologies and things that we can do to reduce the risk of extreme heat. But I don't think we can have an intelligent conversation about that until we understand the sort of scope and scale of what we face. And that's what I really tried to do in this book, is to redefine how we think about heat. It's not just a reason to turn up the air conditioner or a reason to go to the beach. That it is it's profoundly impacting our bodies and our world in very, very, very big ways. Ways that were surprising even to me after covering climate change for 20 years when I started to really dive into this subject. Let me just start with what we all know, which is this heat wave that we're having in Asia and Southeast Asia right now, which is really extreme. And the implications of this are very difficult for us to grasp, for anyone who's not there, living there sort of at the moment. But these kinds of extreme heat events are becoming more and more common as our climate warms up. One of the challenges of talking about heat is that we talk about it in terms of 1.5 C of warming, 2 C of warming, things like that. And that doesn't really register with people. You know, when we try to talk about it with people outside of the climate world, saying 2 degrees of warming, it just like, okay, so what's the difference between 35 and 37 or 33 and 34? It's very difficult to kind of communicate what these extreme heat events really mean. And what we're seeing is more and more of these extreme events. It's not just this sort of slow progression into a warmer world. We're seeing these extreme heat spikes that are driven by changes in atmospheric circulation and things like that, which I won't go into right now. But one of the key ideas in my book that I really want to stress, and the couple of ideas I want to communicate in these few minutes, is this idea of a Goldilocks zone. That our civilization, our bodies, everything about our world is calibrated for that evolved during a fairly stable climate time. I call it the Goldilocks zone. It's a phrase that I stole from scientists who study life on other planets. They look for the presence of liquid water as a precursor for life. So not too cold so it's ice, not too hot so it's evaporated and it's like Venus. And this idea is, I think, a really important one to grasp when we think about heat, because what's happening now as our world heats up is we're moving out of this Goldilocks zone. Our bodies are good at dealing with heat within a certain range of temperatures. Animals, crops, everything living has a Goldilocks zone. And they're pretty good at dealing with it. And when it gets too hot or too cold, they move or they do various other kinds of adaptations. But moving out of this stable climate zone is really important in thinking about the implications of heat and thinking about what to do about it. Because it's also not just us and all living things, but the infrastructure of our world. is built for these particular range of heat. And as it gets hotter and hotter, those infrastructures fail, are challenged. We have to think about building our world in a different way. The climate that we all grew up in is gone. We're not going back to that. We're in a new climate. We're out of the Goldilocks zone. We're moving out of the Goldilocks zone, and it's happening very quickly. As many of you know, the last 10 years have been the hottest 10 years in human record. There's a lot of discussion right now, literally, I mean like yesterday, right now in a very, very immediate sense, about what was the implications of this kind of acceleration that we've seen in warming in the last year. Does it mean that a climate is responding in a different way to the levels of CO2 in the atmosphere? There's a lot of debate among scientists, but there's no debate around the fact that it is getting hotter faster, right? And the implications of that, how quickly we're going to move out of this Goldilocks zone, are very profound for our lives and for everything that we build and think about and how we design the future. The other thing that I really want to communicate about heat that goes beyond the sort of more specific things we're going to talk about today is that heat is I call it in the book, the engine of planetary chaos. It is the thing that is behind all of the other impacts that we think of with climate change. Sea level rise, drought, wildfires, all those things, migration, all those things are driven by heat. It's the accumulation of heat in the atmosphere that is the primary driver of all this stuff that we think about when we think about climate change. So when we think about what to do about all of this, we have to think in this sort of bigger way about heat as this driver of chaos. And you can go in the book I go into it in great detail, the impact on crops, food, plants, like every other living thing, have a Goldilocks zone. When it gets too hot, the crops fail. They don't grow in the same ways. Forests are migrating. Animals are migrating. I live in Texas, in the belly of the beast for the fossil fuel, for the climate story in America. And for example, our cattle industry is in huge trouble in Texas because of this extreme heat and drought. It's reorganizing a lot of these agricultural systems. Wildfires, which I don't need to tell anyone about, the risks of wildfires and the complications of wildfires are directly related to rising heat, right? The soil is drier, the forests are drier. When something is sparked, the fires are bigger, more intense. It's a direct link. Sea level rise, again, obvious. The hotter it gets, the quicker the ice melts. I learned that when I was 4, when I dropped my popsicle on the sidewalk. Same kind of thing is happening now. We're heating up the planet. These blocks of ice at the poles are melting faster and faster. Seas are rising quicker and quicker with huge implications for low-lying cities all around the world. But I really want to focus just for a minute now, before I wrap up, on the sort of human aspect of this, which is what we're going to be talking about today. And as we're going to talk some on the panel, our bodies are very tuned to heat. We're good at dealing with, small changes in temperature. But as you all know, if you go to the doctor and you're not feeling well, the first thing they ask you is, what is your temperature? They take your temperature. Just small changes in temperature are a sign of something going wrong. And when our body temperatures rise just a few degrees, it has huge implications for our health. We have a mechanism for dealing with heat, right, which is sweat. Everyone knows about this. But that mechanism doesn't work so well as we get outside of this Goldilocks zone. It works differently in dry heat versus wet heat. Humidity affects the evaporation of heat. That's why wet heat is more dangerous than dry heat. There's all of these distinctions about the kind of heat, the duration of heat. Is it hot at night? Did we have time to cool off? These are things we'll talk about today. But I just really want to underscore this idea that our bodies are tuned to this narrow band of temperature that we are moving out of. And it is, of course, in the book I call heat a predatory force. It goes after people who are most vulnerable. It goes after workers who are outside. It goes after people who have heart conditions. It goes after pregnant women. It goes after people who are on certain medications. It is a predatory force. And it's not gender specific in that sense. All of us are vulnerable. In my book, I open up with a chapter about a family that goes for a hike in California, and healthy man, healthy woman, and a 1.5-year-old baby and their dog, and they didn't come home. And their friends worried, and when they didn't come home that night, and they called the sheriff went out and sent a search party out, found the entire family dead on the trail. And it was a mystery what happened to these people. They thought at first that it was some kind of terrible group suicide thing, family suicide thing, or that it was carbon monoxide gas was released from an abandoned mine nearby. No, they all died of heat stroke on this hike. Perfectly healthy, young family. So everyone is vulnerable in the right or wrong kinds of conditions, but some of us are more vulnerable than others. We're going to talk a lot today about specifics of the difference between how men and women are impacted by heat. This is, in framing this discussion, I want to say this is something that's very new. We're still learning a lot about this. We're still learning a lot about the impacts of heat in general, but especially these differences in gender and how it impacts us. We talked in the opening a little bit about why women are more vulnerable to heat than men in certain situations. There are physiological differences. Risks of pregnancy, miscarriage are much higher when women are exposed to extreme heat. One of the things that I find really interesting that doesn't get talked about enough, and we'll talk about a little bit later, is we're still learning, we still almost know nothing or very little about the psychological impacts of heat. And we know that rates of suicide are higher when it gets hotter. We know that domestic violence is greater during heat waves. And the implications of this for women are really profound and is just beginning to be understood. And let me wrap up just to guide us into this discussion we're going to have with one of the things that I think is most sort of emblematic of these differences in risk exposure by gender, which is disease patterns. So one of the things that happens when it gets hotter and we move out of this Goldilocks zone is that animals move just like we do. Frogs move to higher elevations. Polar bears try to get, they don't have very far to go, but they try to get to cool places. That's what happens, right? Animals, that's their adaptation is by migration, right? And one of the animals that's really good at migrating, as we all know, is mosquitoes, right? Or other kinds of insects, but mosquitoes are the ones that we're really concerned about. They move very quickly as temperature changes. They're very sensitive to temperature changes. And so we're seeing disease patterns change as our temperature ranges change. Mosquitoes are moving to new areas, changing patterns for malaria, changing patterns for Zika, dengue fever, things like that. But it's particularly interesting for the impacts of this on women. So Zika, for example, I've known a number of people who've had Zika. It's a disease that is not usually lethal. It causes headaches. Maybe some of you have had Zika. But for women, especially pregnant women, it is a completely different kind of disease because it runs the risk of, for pregnant women, of encephalitis, not encephalitis, for having children who have a smaller head, right? And so it has a profound lifelong impact on women that it doesn't have on men. It's a very clear example of gender difference. Malaria also, scientists don't know exactly why, but women are much more vulnerable to malaria than men are. They are bitten at a higher rate. They are infected at a higher rate. Pregnant women especially. These are some of the sort of subtleties of science that we're just beginning to understand and why this sort of gender-specific lens at looking at the impacts of heat is so important, because this is just the tip of the iceberg of understanding these risks that we're facing right now. So with that, we will begin the discussion here, right? Okay.
Thank you very much, Jeff, for really setting the scene for us for the discussion that we will have with our next 4 speakers. Before we go on, if I could just ask the pigeonhole slide to be up. If you have any questions, we will have sufficient time at the end to post questions and to ask questions of Jeff and also our other panelists. So please go to Pigeonhole and post your question. You can also vote up other people's questions. So please help us use this way of queuing up our questions. So if I could request the other panelists to come up, and I will just introduce them as they come up. So I will start with Andreas Flores, who specializes in health and productivity impacts of climate change, advising international bodies such as the ILO, the International Labour Organization, and WHO, and contributing to occupational health and climate policy for both these institutions, among others. So he's been recognized on the 2023 Time 100 Next list of future global leaders, and his work spans over 15 years of working on issues related to heat and climate change. Our next panelist is Bushra Afreen. She's the Chief Heat Officer for the city of North Dhaka, a city of more than 15 million people. Bushra is a social welfare executive who has advanced changes within Bangladesh's garment sector to protect workers and deliver a more sustainable product. She initiated a task force to reduce heat on production floors and implemented mother-friendly changes in factories. Next, I will invite Ronita Badran, who's an associate professor of sustainable built environment and director of the Cambridge Sustainable Design Group. Ronita works on a built environment intervention-led health inequalities in the warming climate with a focus on gender-inclusive solutions. She has been ranked among the top 2 scientists in her domain and has received awards for her contribution to urban health, housing, and climate change. And finally, Tiffany Crawford, and she is the co-director of Climate Change and City Resilience and Chief Heat Officer of the City of Melbourne in Australia, and where she advances climate initiatives and sustainable human development in the city of Melbourne. Her work aims to make Melbourne resilient against extreme heat through collaborative projects in renewable energy and green infrastructure. So I will start with a question for Andreas, and I think I better hand you over the clicker. Yes. I think this will work. Okay. So I hope this works. Yes. So, Andreas, you have done a great deal of research on the challenges that extreme heat poses for workers. Could you talk about how can governments best increase the readiness to protect women and other vulnerable groups and workers during extreme heat events? And maybe you can also highlight some of the effective measures that have been implemented to protect workers from heat stress in diverse working environments such as agriculture, manufacturing, and construction.
Thank you, and thank you for having me in this great panel. If you can put up, yes. So Jeff showed us a lot of excellent statistics, and he presented a very nice introduction on the topic and why it is important. And I recently went to a report published by recently by the World Meteorological Organization, which talks about the climate, the state of climate in Asia. And there you can see the the issues as they appear, especially in terms of extreme events. And as you can see, in terms of extreme events, only 5% of cases refer to heat. And in terms of the deaths, the mortality that these 5% of cases produce or generate is 8% of the climate-related extreme events. Reading this, one would, I'm sure, suspect why we're having this panel. It's just a minor issue and is only a fraction of the problem. Well, in reality, this is not the case, and for many reasons, and I will quickly outline a few. First of all, I contributed to a report that was published last week by the International Labour Organization, and we're publishing another report in a couple of months delving even more deeply into the topic, where we show that for workers especially, only 1 in 10 days that have to do with heat are happening during a heat wave. So what you see up there is basically 10% of the problem. So when we talk about 5%, in fact, it's 50%. It's not 5. But unfortunately, some organizations only monitor extreme events. So if we look at the extreme events, it's like the tip of the iceberg, but we need to go below the surface. Currently, 2.4 billion workers are affected by heat, and only 10% of that happens during a heat wave. So it's important to forget about heat waves. Not forget it completely, but realize that it's only 10% of the problem. Number 2, Asia is rising in heat. It's the second fastest, only second to Europe, second fastest continent on the planet. So this 5%, 10% that you see there, which is 10% of the problem, actually is going to get even worse in the coming years. Then even now, even with this situation as it is right now, still the burden of disease is quite extreme. Unfortunately, it's not monitored if we look only at extreme events, but as you can see, this is in a report that will come from the International Labour Organization in a few weeks, as I mentioned. And in the ADB region, currently, every year, there are about 10.5 million occupational injuries that are happening. This is ILO data, UN data, every year due to workplace heat stress. It's not because of any other reason. It's not because of asbestos or noise or vibration, but because people went to work and it was hot at the workplace. And even worse, in the ADB region, currently there are more than about 21 million people living with chronic kidney disease, a devastating condition that has only 5 years life expectancy currently, and devastating also on the economy because it hits the people at their most productive stage, and it has a huge impact on the healthcare system. So 21 billion people living in the ADB region currently because they were working in a place that was hot. So the health impact is tremendous. But it's not only that. It's not only the reason why we're having this panel today, is because this is a lose-lose situation. What we're seeing also, and Jeff also mentioned this, we're losing productivity. We're bleeding money. What you see there is the productivity loss in the ADB region, more or less currently, because we're in the middle of the decade. So depending on the quarter of the year, the region, different countries go from 10% up to 30% productivity loss. What's more important with these graphs is that they are wrong. Actually, they're graphs that I was a lead author there, but they're wrong. And they're wrong because we know in the last 4 years, we're going to the field and we're collecting data. These are actually these estimates, and unfortunately, most estimates on economic impacts of heat are based on models that are outdated. We're currently seeing that the effects are much more widespread. We previously thought that workers are not affected, productivity is not affected unless it's really hot, unless temperature goes beyond 27 degrees Celsius specifically. Why? Because somebody developed a model in the 90s that said that. We're actually seeing that productivity is affected for every degree Celsius beyond 15 degrees Celsius. Why? Because laborers are doing active work and they're also wearing protective clothing. So they're a lot more vulnerable than people who are not so active or when they're at home. So for every degree Celsius beyond 15, we have about 2.5 on average percent decline in productivity. Can you imagine these maps when we revise them, how they're going to look? Now, the other problem also is, as Zoni also mentioned, that heat, and Jeff as well, heat does not affect everybody equally. It affects certain groups that are more at risk. Women, of course, are probably the most important and the most vulnerable. And again, this is going to be also part of the ILO report. And it's recognized by laborers and labor organizations. So it's not something that we're discussing just here because we're really passionate about this topic. Women are making up a lot of the informal sector, and in that sector we have lower wages, lack of cooling, support, water services, lack of toilet facilities, which makes women less likely to want to drink water. And keep in mind that one of the most important and economically viable solutions to address heat stress is just to give people water. Giving people water increases productivity by about 10% and reduces their health risks by at least 2 to 3-fold, just giving water. So if somebody does not want to go to the toilet, it means that they have to avoid drinking water, making them more vulnerable to heat stress. And we have seen not only, so it's not only a social issue, but it's also a physiological issue. Even if everything else stays the same, because of pregnancy and certain other physiological differences, especially women beyond a certain age, beyond 40, 45, 50 years of age, they're a lot more vulnerable because they sweat a lot less, and because they tend to be, of course, on average, they tend to be smaller than men, and this makes them even more vulnerable. Even everything else stays the same. So what do countries do? We've been starting to look at what countries are doing and trying to support them and give good examples so that other countries can follow. And it's nice to see that more and more countries are actually picking up the pace and creating legislations and regulations to protect workers. In the ADB region, there are, I think, 5 countries that have binding legislation. China, Japan, Thailand, I have them here, sorry, India and Singapore. I may be missing some, but these are 5 that I found. And not all, but some do include gender-specific guidance. Some of them don't, and they do need to get updated. Some of them are very comprehensive, and some of them are a bit superficial. So hopefully when we produce more and more data, these binding legislations will be updated and support this issue as well.
Thank you very much, Andreas. So I want to turn to Ronita, but I think first you wanted to share a very brief video. So if we could have that play, I think it very well reflects some of the work that you have been doing.
Temperature is rising and population is growing. New housing solutions for the marginalized low income are being introduced. These houses are replacing the horizontal slums with little regards to health and energy burdens. In Global South, flats of 25 square meters are homes to families of 5 to 11. Indoor temperature are projected to increase by 22%, causing extreme heat stress. This makes affordable housing a critical climate and health challenge. Extreme heat affects people disproportionately. Women are more affected than men, as they spend 40% more time indoors. But can these affordable housing adapt to the extreme heat burdens? We spoke to 25 households in Ethiopia and India to understand what does heat mean to them.
This place is more hot than the slums. I feel suffocated, even when I am standing in the balcony. There are mosquitoes. We cannot sit outside. In the slums, we never fell sick so often. Here, it has increased 10 times. The sliding windows cannot be opened fully. We want windows that are fully openable. I take shower and adjust my clothing for the night time. Sometimes I dip my foot in water to cool myself. It is more hot here because there are no green trees nearby. We like sitting under trees in extreme heat days. The poor quality roof causes more heat indoors. It should have external shading.
The residents suggested design solutions to make their homes more comfortable to live in during heat. A good home is one that is climate resilient and can decouple health stress and energy burdens from poverty penalty. A different design approach is needed to build climate resilient homes that respect cultural norms and are a place for well-being and growth.
Okay. So thank you for sharing that. I think it would be really great to hear from you how you are finding through your research, both as part of this project, but so in your other work, the different health impacts that women are experiencing from extreme heat. And I think you also have done a lot of thinking around this sort of social and cultural context of how heat is impacting women. So if we can hear from you about that work.
Thank you so much, Zoni. Can we have the presentation? I'll quickly go to slide number 24, if it is possible. I call it invisible burden of heat, but maybe I'll try from here. I'll try a slow show from here. So one of the things, if you look at what we did was we wanted to understand first thermal comfort, because it's not a medical term. It is more about how people are comfortable and what temperature. But I'll show you how that has a very strong physiological link through cultural empowerment and cultural norms, not allowing a particular gender to exercise their freedom of expression to adapt to thermal comfort or heat. So when we went to a group of women and men on a same very hot day at between 11 o'clock to 2 p.m., which is the hottest part of the day, and we asked them, do you feel hot? This is the only question we asked them. They all had access to a ceiling fan and windows. So no fancy devices that we were asking them to operate if they wanted themselves to cool themselves down. So, and if you see the top portion, they are all males. And you see a number written at the bottom of the image. So I'll tell you how to understand that number. When we go to buy a jacket or a coat, we turn around and then we look for a number which is like 0.9. Oh, it will really keep me warm in a very cold day. It's the insulation of that clothing. And if you look at the top values of all the men, the clothing that they are wearing, they have quite a varied number, but it kind of thresholds at 0.5, 0.7 is the high, 0.84 is one chap who wants to be really fashionable and doesn't care about heat stress or thermal comfort, and that's why it's 0.84. Otherwise, you see quite a variation, and there's quite a degree of freedom around the way they are choosing the insulation to cover themselves up. Whereas if you see the bottom layer, this is a hot summer day. All of them are wearing traditional clothes, so nothing fashionable about it. But the clothing insulation closest to something which we will wear in a very cold day. And I'm talking about cold means anything be in a single-digit number in temperature. So when we all asked them, do you feel hot? And it was around 28, 29 degrees, which is a temperature which we all will choose to switch on some sort of a cooling device. And all the bottom people said, no, we are comfortable. No change in temperature is required. All the top people said, yes, I want to switch on a fan, because that was the only available option to them. And then what we did, we went and repeated this experiment till the time the temperature crossed 32 degrees. Until the temperature crossed 32 degrees, none of the women said that they want to switch on the fan. And what does this show? This shows that there is a gap in also resorting to any sort of cooling. Also, when we asked them, when do you actually switch on a cooling device? Men said, whenever we feel hot. All the women said, I only switch on the cooling device when my children are at home or when I am, the men of the family comes back from work. I do not switch on the fan, however hot I feel, when I'm alone. And this is something I think most of the women from the Global South, from the ADB region community will resonate to. This is very cultural. This access to a cooling device, even when the switch is right beside them to turn on a cooling solution, will not be accessed because women spend more than 54% of the time indoors at home in these sort of communities. So they don't want to be blamed for burdening the electrical bill. So they're not going to switch it on. And this is basically seen mostly in communities, low-income communities. If you move up the ladder in the socioeconomic, when women have that access, their thermal history is now changing. They cannot tolerate heat anymore. So they will switch on the fan at 26 degrees. So with cooling solutions, it kind of alters our temperature tolerances. But this sort of community is going to become more and more vulnerable. So this is one point. Then we started looking at gender and mortality at a larger length. And this is global burden of disease data. And if you see generally for India, this is not very subpopulation specific. This is global population of India. And we found that generally the mortality is going down, which is a good sign of development, which is a sign of access to better healthcare. But when we looked at it through a gendered lens, we found out while the men mortality was going down, the female mortality was going up. And this is all temperature-related mortality. So we might conclude that women in India are becoming much more vulnerable to heat. Yes, that is one, definitely. The second is how data on deaths for women are recorded in countries like India. Historically, so you can see we started from 1990 to 2020. So historically, we have first-hand experience of looking at data on female deaths. Often female deaths are not recorded as female. They are recorded by somebody's wife or somebody's mother. Often the gender box is missing. So when we started looking at the data, you will see the same name appearing twice if the men died. So this is where, so we cannot actually conclude from this graph that women are actually more vulnerable. Maybe that recording of deaths is becoming better, but definitely there is a proportion of heat, the rising heat that is contributing to this mortality. So this is what we kind of came across, that while data and recording of heat-related mortality is becoming important, it is also important there isn't no data on cultural access to any sort of cooling device. How will we empower them culturally, not economically, not socially, but culturally, to actually accept that their body, physiologically, their body is going to under stress?
Thank you. And I mean, I think it's really important to underscore that 60% less women have access to cooling than men.
Yes.
And so this has huge implications for our approaches towards solutions and making sure that access to cooling for women is really a priority. So my next question is for Bushra. We have been hearing the news about how the temperatures across Bangladesh have really hit record highs, with 33 million children out of school because of the heat wave. In the city that you serve, North Dhaka, you see the impacts of increasing temperatures with really alarming consequences for women and for the poor. So can you talk a little bit about the challenges? You've been in this role for almost a year now, and so that's not very much time, but you've moved very, very quickly on identifying the things that you need to work on. So can you talk about some of your priorities as the Chief Heat Officer for North Dhaka?
Yes, thank you, Zani, and thank you, Ronita, as well. It's really nice to see these data that is really missing in our societies to. No, I don't have a presentation. But it's really nice to see these figures being represented, and acknowledge that some of these figures aren't even there. But that doesn't mean it's not happening. So I think to start off with, when I first came into this role, and it's been almost a year now, but what we quickly realized that there was a real lack of knowledge, especially regarding the things that Jeff said, that Zani, that we are all saying here, that how heat affects gender disproportionately, especially women and girls. There is almost no data on this within health departments in Bangladesh, whether it's national health data or local health data. We are starting to collect it now. In the 1 year that I've been here, there has been a major shift in how we think about heat, which has been really positive, which has had positive cascading impacts as well. But even then, we have to acknowledge that there is a lack of infrastructure that supports that would support women to be able to access cooling. There is, so many women are working in Dhaka North, but as they move, as they're going from their homes to work, while they're in transit with their children, even they move through the city without wanting to be seen, without wanting to take up space. And during heat season, it is so important to be able to rest, to be able to stop and cool yourself and then proceed. And you see men doing it in our society all the time. All the shaded areas in our city are and I've grown up looking at it, and it's like it's almost become an image that is part of our national or local fabric. And you see men sipping tea or drinking coconut water under the shade, but you never see women. So one of the priorities that I've made is to address that, to make sure that women are able to access cooling spaces throughout the city where they won't feel harassed or intimidated, where they won't be afraid to take up space, where they will be encouraged to take up space. I think that goes on to my next point, which is we have to work harder at making the women, but the women themselves, like the women that you mentioned, that, hey, this is your right. You have a right to be cool. You don't have to sacrifice yourself for your kids or for your husband or for the male members of your family or for your in-laws. You matter. And your health matters. And I think it's high time that our local government sees that too and invests in them, and resources are allocated towards these women and towards their health, especially women from vulnerable communities, especially women living in informal settlements, because as we all know, in the global south, our economies are supported by women in the informal sector who work in the informal sector, and these jobs are not regulated. They are not. Nobody's protecting their rights there. Nobody's protecting domestic workers' rights. And if you look at that, and you also look at the unpaid domestic labor that women do after they come back home from working wherever they're working, you see that their heat exposure doesn't stop. It starts in the morning where they're walking to work, and it continues as they're working near heat sources in the houses, whether it's cooking or cleaning or manual labor, and it continues when they're walking back home in the afternoon under the scorching sun, and it continues as they go back to their houses, which are many of them are made of metal, and it's like an oven because it's been baking in the sun all day long. There is no ventilation. There is maybe one ceiling fan in the entire place, and then they're cooking again, and they're looking after the kids, and they can't sleep at night. There's no respite. They are not able to rest their bodies or cool down their bodies at night either. And a lot of the times they're spending all of that nighttime trying to put their kids to sleep because their kids can't sleep either. So they're, fanning them with hand fans. And in the morning, this whole process starts over again. So this repeated stress on their bodies makes them more and more vulnerable on top of the them being already vulnerable because of their physiology, because of maybe they're pregnant or breastfeeding. And also, Andreas, you spoke about the toilet. So one of the other things that we are really pushing in on our awareness campaign that's about to be launched later this month is women honestly need to be told at this point that you can't go on as you have behaved in the last, ever since you were a child, because the women in our culture have been socialized to not drink water so that we don't have to use the washrooms during the day. It is so normalized, and you and I were talking about it, and do you know that it's not a thing? It's not a thing in a lot of Western societies. So we are really prioritizing, the importance of women staying hydrated during the heat, because it is a new climate, as Jeff said. It is a new world, and it's a hot world, and we need to make sure that women are drinking water. We need to make sure that they have access to bathrooms and that they feel encouraged to use bathrooms. We need to make sure that there's more cooling spaces that are also being designed by women and maintained by them, so that they know, and we can keep working on these together, and we can identify, okay, so we designed something in a certain way and that's not working, so immediately let's change it to let's find out what works and what doesn't work. And the more we invest in these solutions, the burden on health costs will decrease, productivity will increase, and ultimately everyone will benefit. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I'm going to turn to you, Tiffany. The city of Melbourne has been really a trailblazer in addressing heat stress, trying to inspire people to change their behavior, to take care of themselves. And that work has been thanks to you and your co-director or chief heat officer in sort of leading the way and supporting the city to do this. So we've heard, one of the messages is around the importance of people to change their behavior, but also to take care of themselves. So can you talk about some of these behavior change measures that you've implemented in Melbourne to support people to adapt during heat waves?
Thanks, Sonny. Good morning, and what an amazing panel. Thank you for inviting me on. So in Melbourne, I might start by setting the scene, and a lot of people are surprised and make jokes about the fact that I'm the Chief Heat Officer of Melbourne, because if you've been to Melbourne, and I don't want to scare you off, it can be very cold. It's also a cool, temperate climate. So people are actually surprised to learn that more people die in Melbourne from heat than any other city in Australia. And the reasons for that are multifaceted, but one of those is that we're not prepared for heat. When we have these intense heat events, which do come and can last 4 to 5 days at a time, the nights do not drop down in heat. People do not change their work patterns, they don't change their daily lives. And also our infrastructure, our buildings, our homes, our workplaces are not designed for those extremities. So heat is very much a silent killer in Melbourne and has been for many years. Fortunately, many people have been working on heat before me, and we are really well renowned for a world famous urban forest strategy, for our green infrastructure, for our parks and gardens, and also for water storages and really ramping up our efforts to store more water in order to keep our urban forests and our green infrastructure alive in times of water scarcity. But since our appointment as Chief Heat Officers in the last couple of years and joining this network of remarkable all women through the Adrian Arsht Rockefeller Foundation, through which Bushra and I met, and there are 10 of us at the moment around the world in various cities, My job share partner, Krista, and I have been communicating as advocates, public health advocates, around the dangers of heat. And that's extraordinary, actually. It's an extraordinary privilege to be able to be a spokesperson on heat. It's unusual as a public servant to be given the ability to be able to speak publicly on the issue. And so we have been working alongside media to talk to people about the dangers that they might experience. Australians probably just kind of soldier on and think, well, we've grown up with heat, it's always been part of our lives, so we'll just keep on going. But heat has changed in Melbourne and continues to change. So we talk about the simple measures that people can take around hydration, around rethinking their movements through the city. We talk to them about something we're really proud of called Cool Routes, which we actually mapped the city in order to understand the coolest way to move through the city rather than the quickest. And we've tried to communicate that to the public, and that's been really effective. We have, in the last summer event, we've trialled some more tangible efforts such as handing out cool kits, which include simple interventions such as hand fans. They're having a comeback. I've seen people using them on public transport. Neck towels, which can be soaked in water and wrapped around your neck. The information about important health measures to take during a heat event and to communicate that. And then we also ensure that we're working with trusted community advocates, because in Melbourne we have I think 43% of our population speak a language other than English. It's a fabulous part of the makeup of our city, but also really important to ensure that we're doing adequate community outreach. We run seminars, and then something that we're really getting great interest and uptake in is rapid response cooling centres. So working with community organisations and using our own facilities to open up facilities that aren't otherwise being used in heat events, so that we can access and provide reprieve to people who don't have access to air conditioning or fans, or perhaps are in insecure housing, to have a safe place to come to access healthcare, to cool off and look after themselves. So that's been really, really successful, and we're getting a lot of traction. We're doing a lot as well in the medium and longer term around the way that we design our cities, and particularly through now a gender lens and a gender inclusive lens. And I think this is really important to note, and that is that architecture, city planning, traditionally has been cities have been designed by men, buildings have been designed by men. So we are now applying a gender lens to really understand how women are moving about our cities, and how might we make our cities more inclusive. And so this is relevant for a number of health impacts, but also for heat. So really making sure that people have adequate access to green spaces, and that we're designing our buildings and our public spaces, but also our private realm, because really only 10% of our city is owned by the city. 90% is owned by the private sector. So we need to ensure that we have adequate planning of our cities, that all new buildings and all buildings that are retrofitted are ready for a changing climate, and that are resilient to this rapidly changing world.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that really thorough sort of overview of sort of what the City of Melbourne is doing. We have a number of questions on the Pigeonhole, so I'm just going to go directly to those questions so we have enough time to answer them. So the first one is, what are the best and cheapest forms of adaptation? How can ADB support countries whose governments ultimately don't serve women, the vulnerable, or those in poverty? So who would like to start on that question? Yes. So Ronita and then Andreas.
Because I have worked in these sort of communities, not just in India, but also across the global south, for quite a lot of years now. I think when these houses were being built across the global south, the heat factor was not even considered. So when ADB funds something in these sort of spaces in terms of making houses, but there should be a concern about public infrastructure that is placed in more gendered spaces. So if any of you have ever gone into these spaces, they have a very unique organic arrangement of temporarily gendering spaces. So at a certain time of the day, you will never find men in those spaces. Can we install public cooling solutions there? Can we, and this can be part of the call for proposal for these sort of, when tendering happens for these sort of housing. So these one significant portion is if when women act, and they are not being hijacked by men and kept under lock and key. So we have seen this earlier when rooms were given for child daycare facilities for children. One of the room at the ground floor was allocated to these sort of daycare facility, and it was under lock and key, and it was never accessible to women. So they never placed their children there. They never got access to that room. So instead of that, if we can actually ask the woman, where would you want this cooling solution or a public cooling hub to be put? This can act as multi-purpose room. They can teach their children there when they come back from school, a lot of other things. But this has to be driven from the woman. So instead of public top-down going and saying, this room will be allocated for cooling solution.
Great, thank you. So Andreas, over to you. But I also, I think that there's this general idea that some of these solutions really cost a lot, right? That in order for us to invest in heat resilience, that it necessarily is costly, and so we delay doing it. So maybe you and I were talking about this, and I think it was part of our discussion earlier. So maybe we can hear from you and maybe others who might have some insights into this. No.
Does it work? No? This one does? Okay, perfect. Thank you. I will start from echoing what Ronita just mentioned. So in the occupational side of things, there are 3 strategies that are the most effective and economically viable. They are rest, shade, hydration, in this order of importance. All of them are very simple to administer, economically viable, and they have major returns on investment. We have seen up to 20% return on investment on anything that is invested on protecting workers from heat. And especially even more so, the return on investment is even higher in vulnerable populations or more at-risk groups, such as women. And it's very important that they are given the ability to use these simple techniques, rest, shade, hydration. What I mean by that, for example, rest means there are specific breaks that workers are allowed to take during their work shift, and they are these breaks come from the employer, so the worker is never criticized for taking them. Shade means that they have to take the breaks in a shaded, cool area, and of course hydration, drinking water, and having of course access to toilets so that you can drink enough water for that. And the role that the ADB can have in this is crucial, not only in the ADB but also the finance sector, the government. It's key that because these are top down, the contractors, and I've worked in many countries, both in Western countries, but also in the developing world. And the contractors, because they're afraid that they're going to lose productivity, they're afraid that this is going to be costly for them, both in terms of time, but also in terms of money. They are reluctant to adopt these strategies. Only very forward-looking contractors would actually adopt them, and they would actually see multiple returns on investment. But these are the exception. So unless they are forced during a procurement stage, so that they can add these in the contracts that they assign, it's very likely that they will not they do that. And that's why I think ADB and other banks and the finance sector and the governments play a key role in this.
Thank you very much. Tiffany, you wanted to comment on that?
Yeah, I think that there's solutions in nature that exist and have existed forever that we can call upon to cool our planet, to cool our cities, that don't have to cost a lot. And this is something, actually, a conversation that we have been having at the City of Melbourne for a long time. And I'm constantly using my skills of negotiation internally to demonstrate to people, along with my team, that the interventions for infrastructure provision, in fact, do not need to be more expensive in order to also offer dual benefits of cooling the city. It's just about doing things differently and a rethink and a shift in the provision of that infrastructure, the way that we design it. So I think that there's a really important role of procurement in the way that we go out to market, the signals that we're sending around our requirements for delivery of infrastructure. But then also, I can't wait to see what's happening in this really exciting space of putting value on nature-based solutions. And I think that's a whole other conversation and another panel, but valuing nature in cities, not just as nature as something outside of cities, is critical given the rapidly changing population, and that 70% or more of our world will live in cities by 2050, and that we're densifying. We need to densify in order to avoid the further impacts of climate change. But that then means we have to change the way we deliver cities.
Thank you. Bushra, you wanted to also comment?
Yeah, just because Tiffany mentioned nature-based solutions, and she's absolutely correct. We have to think of cities building cities in a different way, and that includes really shifting our mentality around, it's going to be. Like, for example, we had to really push and justify why you should spend a quarter of the budget or even 1% of the budget you usually spend on constructing roads or buildings that would go into nature-based solutions like urban forests or urban greening, and putting in the budget to maintain them, or even creating because there are people who want to take care of trees and plants and in their own neighborhoods. They exist, and it's all about connecting the right people and bringing them in a system that work. But nobody, this wasn't prioritized for the longest time. You have decades and decades of priorities towards just gray infrastructure and buildings and roads, and now everything's covered in glass. But there was no accountability, no value attributed to nature-based solutions. And I'm really trying to reverse that, to change that. And there is, it hasn't, I haven't, it will take time for me to succeed fully, for us to really change the discourse in an effective way. But I am because the city of Dhaka North is about to launch in a few months the first urban forests, 2 of them. And it's taken us 1 year of advocating for it, of looking at budgets, of figuring out who will maintain them, and just creating this brand new infrastructure. And if you know anything about governments in the global south, you know how difficult it is, especially since due to structures that still exist from colonial times. So it's not designed to be in favor of nature-based solutions. So we have had to change so much from people's way of thinking to institutions and creating the capacity to do these things. And sometimes, so this is where I'd like to disagree a little bit, because sometimes in these situations, they do have a cost, maybe not a financial cost, or even but more beyond the financial cost. And And sometimes things can become expensive, especially when you're looking at an environment that is so built up, that there seems to be no space for nature-based solutions. So these are challenges that we are looking at from an opportunity lens, and we are asking the private sector to be more involved. Let's see. I'm very excited, so let's see what happens.
No, definitely agree with you on the issue of nature-based solutions. So we have a question for you, Jeff. Whether you had a look at the heat effects on children too, and what research have you come across on how heat waves are impacting children in particular?
That's a great question, and to be honest, it's one that I did not explore in great detail in my book or in the research I've done since. I mean, we know that very young children are much more vulnerable to heat because their sweat glands and other physiological responses have not developed yet. We know that anecdotally. I think everybody who knows anything about risks of heat knows about children in cars. I mean, my grandmother used to tell me about that when I had kids, about not leaving my children in a car somewhere. So we have this intuitive understanding of the risks of children, but it's again one of these areas I think that there's still so much unknown, right? The striking thing about thinking about heat either from a sort of physiological point of view, from a climatological point of view, from an urban development point of view, is how little we've thought about it. I mean, I started this book after writing about climate change for 20 years, and I was stunned by how little I knew about heat. In fact, when I started this book, if someone would have asked me, what is heat? I couldn't have told you. I could talk about how you measure it. I knew what temperature was, but I could not. I've been writing about climate change for 20 years and I couldn't define heat. And I think that's emblematic of how ignorant we are about the impacts on children, the impacts on how we design cities, the impacts on how we develop, work heat protection policies, all kinds of things. And for me, it's both kind of the tragedy of it, but also the opportunity of it, because I think that there is so many easy things that we can do about saving lives as our world gets hotter and hotter.
Thank you very much. If I can add, there's also, and maybe Andreas, you can comment on this as well. There's a very close relationship between pollution and heat, and of course that is having a huge impact on children. And there's also some research that both you and Ronita have been working on the impacts of increasing heat on pregnant women and on their fetus, and sort of the development impact that is having. So maybe we don't have a lot of time, but maybe just very briefly you can speak to those two issues.
Thank you. Absolutely. There's definitely a very strong correlation between heat exposure and we would say absorption of pollutants, because when somebody gets hotter, we breathe harder. We take more frequent breaths, but also deeper breaths. And as a result, the air is not filtered as well. So not only our body absorbs more air pollution, there's also a correlation between heat and the way the concentration of air pollutants in the atmosphere, and also dust in the atmosphere. So you're exposed to more pollutants and you inhale a lot more as well. So there's definitely a link there, and there's compounding effects also in the workplace. For example, that I do a lot of my work also. There's pollution also from chemicals used in the occupational by the task related and job related air pollution as well. With regards to pregnancy, we are setting up a large study in Greece and in the Gambia as well, and it's a very complex topic. We're just trying now to untangle this very complex connection between heat and pregnancy, and effects both on the mother and on the fetus. Not only there's clear impacts, but also it appears that, for example, we see that women who are exposed to heat on the first trimester have very different effects on both the mother and the fetus compared to those who are exposed on the third trimester. Obviously, depending on the level of the development of the stage of development of the fetus, but also on the health of the mother and the impact on her. So we're hoping to do a lot more work on this in the future. It's just starting now, and more work comes out. I think in the next 3-4 years we will know so much more on this. Right now, I think we're just starting to scratch the surface.
No, completely agree with you, because we did a project in Kenya where we co-located the double vulnerability just from heat as well as vector-borne diseases. 10 years back, lots of funding was given to kind of educate people living in vulnerable communities that water and sanitation is bad and that's related to health. But when you go and talk to them, that what you think will kill you, nobody talks about heat because there was no work done to make the heat visible. And so a lot of interventions and money was put into make homes mosquito entry repellent, like you cannot. So what it did was, the unintended consequence of that, most of these women used to cook outside. And because when cooking, it attracts mosquitoes, the smell of cooking, they move their cooking indoors now. And now they have triple burden from mosquitoes, because 10 years back, whatever was installed is now shredding and they don't have the money to repair it. Second is the heat, both from the cooking as well as the stored heat inside. And the third is from the indoor air pollution. And so this triple burden is invisible. There is no data around it. But what we want to do is, if you have heard of this data, that people who live in discrimination, and this I will relate to gender discrimination here, people, I'm talking about racial discrimination, women often have, birthing mothers often have children who are born with a lower birth weight. And this has been seen in US, it has been seen in UK. Any community that is discriminated, the child born has a lower birth rate. We call it weathering. But what is it? Is it also that communities, especially in the global south, where women have been living with this sort of a weathering effect for generations, there is no data to even for us to prove. So we are trying to capture this weathering effect of heat on women and children. And hopefully, at some point, we'll come up with statistics which is alarming enough to raise and say that we now really have to push like we did for WASH 20 years back.
Thank you very much for that. We still have a few questions, but unfortunately, we are running out of time, and I wanted to give everyone a minute to share with the audience and with each other sort of your takeaway from today's discussion. So if I can start with you, Tiffany, in terms of your reflections from today and maybe how we can move forward working on this issue and highlighting the need for more action on gender and heat.
Yeah, I mean, the first is that I'm very aware that I come from one of the most privileged and livable cities in the world, but even in Melbourne, heat is killing all people, and it does have an impact disproportionately on women, and we have our own social vulnerability issues. But that we need to share, we need to collaborate and support one another in these endeavours. But also, my call to action is to really think about the role of cities and city governments who have been working on green infrastructure provision, on adaptation, are at the front line, but are often being left out of the equation. So I think that that's an important take-home message from me.
Thank you, Ronita.
I think methodologies are already in place with a lot of challenges already being solved. I take away from Tiffany and say that when you are funding for climate resilient cities, look for a metric to evaluate these from a more gendered lens. Unless we have that, and by gendered lens, not number of people who often are benefited from it, but from a very intrinsic lens of who actually uses that space. Is this even designed? So can city planners and urban planning missions be targeted for health and heat together, with definitely gender as the center and not one indicator?
Thank you for that.
I have 3 points. Number one is that heat is a lose-lose, especially in the occupational world. We lose health. Billions of people are affected on a daily basis across the world, especially in the ADB region. We lose productivity. We bleed billions right now, and we're going to be bleeding trillions in a few years. So it's a lose-lose both for our health and also our bottom line. Number two is that if we had this panel 10 years ago and somebody asked, do we have solutions and are they viable, economically practical, I would say, I don't know. Right now, I can tell you that we did a review a few years ago, and we found that, a couple of years ago, we found that 70% of the studies on the topic have been published since 2015. It's very recent knowledge, and it's exploding. We know so much more compared to 10 years ago. So we now have the solutions. We know that what is effective, what is not effective, what is practical, what is not, and what is economically feasible and what is not. Number three, governments and finance sector are key to, especially in the occupational world, through procurement and other means to help enforce, if we can say that, measures both for heat and also gendered approaches. I think it's really important.
Thank you. Bushra.
Thank you. Oh, you guys have said everything. I think as we move forward with this year and the next, and we've been working together with Zani and Tiffany on this, and I'm sure I'd love to work with Ronita and Andreas and Jeff if you're interested. As a very densely populated city in Bangladesh, it's very important that we create a gender-inclusive and gender-focused heat action plan, but not just stop there, but think of how we are going to use that heat action plan and whether the city has a dedicated team or dedicated people in positions of power to implement them. And what are the systems of governance, as you said? How would other stakeholders be coordinated in this plan? How do we, and I'm reiterating here, but it's so important to move away from the traditional systems of city building to and really recognize the urgency of it. And that has to be communicated not just at a city level plan, but at the national level. We had an expo on the national adaptation plans. We are going to be launching a climate action plan, and yet there are still gaps on heat stress and gender. When will it be time for us to take these issues seriously? And I really hope that they will be addressed and they will be acted on in the heat action plan that we will be doing. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
So I guess I'd like to wrap up just building on what you said with just one word about this, and that word is speed. You heard a lot of solutions here from these great people who are doing amazing work. But people are dying because of heat. and we don't have like 10 years to think about every policy and to go through the same procurement processes. And this is something that, like, right now we have a heat wave in Southeast Asia. People are dying right now. This is, there's a kind of, you use the word urgency. Whatever the sort of square multiplication of the word urgency is the word that I would use. Yeah. This is different than sea level rise, for example. Really important subject. I wrote a book about it, but no one's going to stand on the beach in Miami and die because a glacier was melting too fast in Greenland, right? People are dying here now because we are not moving fast enough on this. And so, of all aspects of climate change and in development, this is the one I think that where speed is of the essence and where lives can be saved in a very direct and tangible way by moving fast. And that's how I would end.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but I think we have really heard some really sort of passionate and also science-based perspectives on this issue that should inspire all of us to move faster on this issue. To end off, I'm going to have a little bit of an Oprah moment. And there, underneath some chairs, there is, if you reach under, there might be a card, like a business card. And if you have one of those, you get a book from Jeff. And if you don't have one, there might be one here on the third seat. And there, so underneath that, yes, you've got it. Underneath there, under the seat there, you can grab it. Yeah, so there you go, you get a book. But I think there's 4 more, so please look, because there are 4 more. Yes, great. So come up after we finish and you will get a book signed by Jeff. So hopefully. So thank you very much for joining us today, and I hope we can continue, the conversation. Thank you. And don't step over here, because I just...
Lauren wants to meet the Bushra.
Okay. Yes, yes. Okay.
Yeah. That was great. Thank you so much, everyone. That was really, really good.